Okay, we'll get started. Om. 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 Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Mavid Vishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Kratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Bhagavad Gita Bhavatveshini Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pulla Ravindayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraika Panaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Geetamritaduhe Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Sarvadharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja Aham Tva Sarva Papebhyaha Mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. So welcome everyone for yet another lecture series on the 10th chapter. As you know, this chapter is called as Vibhuti Yoga, and Vibhuti essentially means glories. And here what we are doing in this chapter is really celebrating the glories of that great Paramatman, Sri Krishna, in his pure essence. How is that essence, manifested in the world in so many different ways? So as we go through the shlokas in probably in just another lecture or two, you will see how just beautifully Sri Krishna himself has expounded on his glories in the whole universe. So he calls this actually the glories as Paramam or Supreme, because it really enables us to go beyond our mind. Our mind is so fixated on things in the world, and because of that, we experience the joys and we experience the sorrows, we experience so many different emotions. And in all this, we think that experience of joy or happiness in this world which we see is the real thing. But in this chapter, what Sri Krishna is trying to do is take us even beyond that mind into a realm which is beyond the names, forms, everything that we use to transact in this world. And that is why these glories, he calls us as supreme or paramam, you know. So it's really breathtaking in its scope. The entire universe, is kind of covered in this chapter in a very, very kind of an exquisite canvas. And when we are presented with that beautiful canvas, the mind goes completely stilled. As I've always given these examples before, when you go to Grand Canyon or when you go to Niagara Falls, and of course, this happens the first time when you see it, you are just like stunned. totally stunned. And that's how this feeling that you get when you go through this 10th chapter, the later shlokas, the mind just gets stunned in its kind of this rapturous devotion, for that grand cosmic vision that he will be unfolding in the 11th chapter. So Arjuna has that rare fortune to listen to this description directly from the divine lips of this flute Lord, Lord Krishna. So that's what the whole 10th chapter is all about. So, any questions or any thoughts on this chapter as we move, as before we go forward?
Harvom, one question.
Yes.
Okay. Usually the way, we're told or we see that Bhagavan is everywhere, in and through everything. So, the whole universe, so anything is Bhagavan's creation, and he's there, in everything. And
Mm-hmm.
in this chapter, that part is emphasized. But again, uh, I think the way this chapter goes is anything you see something great, think of my glory, think of myself, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
huge mountain, Meru Parvatam or Kamadhenu or Kalpataru.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, how do one understand, like, the greatest thing is he, is the
Mm-hmm.
Bhagavan. But
Right.
again, Bhagavan is in everything.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we just combine these two?
Correct. So you're saying you see everything and you're told that it is Bhagwan is in everything. And your second part you said was
The second chapter is, this chapter has the emphasis says, if you see anything great,
if
anything
you see anything
magnificent,
great, that is nothing but Bhagwan.
that is
Correct?
nothing but Bhagavan. Yeah.
Right. That is one
So
part. And the second part you said is?
yeah. So the question is, how do I correlate? Like, is there in everything, even for example, in a small hill, he's there.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Yes.
there in a Meru,
Correct.
right? Isn't the
Right.
greatest thing.
Right.
So, I mean, how do I just combine these two? Am I making clear, or
I'm still seeing only
I,
one
I, I,
point.
I
You
can, okay,
wanted to say
I
2 points,
can repeat.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I can repeat. So the
Uh,
first part is he's in everything,
correct.
small, big, whatever, is there, he's in everything.
Right.
But in this chapter, he's saying anything the greatness is he,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
So how do I
Very
combine these
good.
two?
Great. I'm so glad you repeated again, because
Okay.
only when you repeated, I was also seeing the subtlety of your question, you know, because
Right.
first you said that God is in everything, and then everything that is great is God. Correct? These are the two
Right, right,
points that we
right.
want to think about.
In this chapter, actually, the
Correct.
direction, the flow. Yeah.
Correct. So, first of all, it's like, when we are a child, and I'm still thinking about my Balavihar days, we start off initially by teaching our children about the greatness of Hanuman. Okay? We say Hanuman is great and everything. As a child, I completely accept it. And I think Hanuman is great. And I want Hanuman to be my best friend and everything. So that's where the greatness of God actually is first portrayed to us. God is great. And so I start, if I hold on to that kind of a thought throughout my life, then what happens is slowly and slowly my mind becomes very subtle, and the subtlety of the mind gets reflected in looking for God in and through everything. Okay. But then what happens for us, which is why this question is so relevant, for us, what happens is at some point in time, we forget about the fact that I learned that the greatness of God is really is reflected in everything. And later I come to the point when I come to, like, for example, the 10th chapter, and I hear about the fact that God is in everything. It's kind of hard for me to uh, contemplate or visualize or anything. So this is why texts like Bhagavad Gita is so very important, because it really emphasizes the three aspects of sadhana that we have to continuously do, which is, number one is, of course, listening. Second thing is mananam, which is really reflecting on the teachings. And after reflecting, to be able to be in that teaching, which is the nididhyasanam. That's a Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, three things that we are expected to do. So your question is a very, very subtle question from that point, because first of all, we are asked to, first we're told that everything is great. God is in everything. Then the second thing is God is in everything. That's where this 9th chapter, shlokas 4 and 5, they are so relevant. We did a lot of discussion, Mananam, in that, where uh, Sri Krishna, says in his uh, highest self, this, uh, we talked about para and apara, right? So in his highest self, he says, they are in me, but I'm not in them, you know? Those two shlokas are very powerful. We'll have to go back and reflect upon that again and again and again. Sees they are in me. This example that he gives, the waves are in the ocean, but I'm not in them. And meaning that in his pure essence, he's not in them. Okay. I'm not trying to confuse you with that chapter, because your question is again very clearly, is that God is in everything. How do I reconcile to that fact? Correct? Anandji, that's where you're coming to, right?
Yes. How do we combine both? Right. Yeah.
Correct. Correct. So that happens only, it happens through that process. We need to go through that whole process of Shravanam, Mananam, and Nididhyasanam. Only then this aspect will sink on the fact that God is in everything, just like we said, um, the waves are in me, I am in them. Actually, in that chapter, he starts initially with saying that I am in them, but later on he contradicts. It seems like it's a contradiction, saying that I'm not in them. The point is, only when the mind becomes subtle will I be able to truly see this statement. When I see the statement, what I mean is where I will be able to actually see this happening. A simple thing, in fact, when you read this 10th chapter, in the introduction, Ananti, and you should read the introduction. It's beautifully uh, I know you may be asking how come I'm remembering what is there in the introduction, because I try to kind of read this every week, before I come for the class, I start to read from the introduction every time I do this, all the way up to 10th. And actually in the introduction, he talks about, in fact, I'll read it out. It's very beautiful. He says, like, suppose you're a doctor, he says, actually, he says, having known that the mud is the essence in all pots, it is just but application of the knowledge if one explains to indicate the place of mud in all pots. For example, in fact, later in Shloka 11 or 12, he talks about how, um, let's maybe a simple, he gives example of mud pot, but I'm just looking at the example of when we make chapatis in the house. Of course, nowadays we just go to Costco and buy the frozen chapatis, right? But when when there was a time when we used to make chapati flour, okay? We'll make this big pindam, big mound of chapati flour. And from this chapati flour, we'll take small chapati flours, bake it into a ball, and then make chapati out of it. Now, we don't even focus on the fact that this small chapati which I'm eating actually came from the big chapati flour, right? So that chapati flour was in the form of flour, but it gets baked. It occupies a certain form. It occupies a certain color also, depending upon how much time I put in the tawa, I guess. And it has fulfilled a certain application. But where did the chapati come from? It actually came from that big mound of chapati flour, right? That is what here this question when you raised, that Krishna is saying that I am in and through everything. What happens to us is we have forgotten that aspect of the fact that he is in everything. Just like taking this analogy of chapati flour, finally, when I come to have the chapati in its baked form, I have forgotten that it actually came from the flour. So ultimately, it is that chapati came from the chapati flour. So too, in this entire world, actually, it is nothing but that Paramatman. But we have forgotten that it's Paramatman because I have become so engrossed in enjoying the form of Paramatman. Okay? In that enjoyment of the form of Paramatman, where you may ask, well, is that my fault? That I have enjoyed that. It is in some form because I have superimposed my own for my own idea of the form and the name of Paramatman onto something, and I'm enjoying that part of it, forgetting that behind it there is nothing but this Brahman, which is in and through everything. So I'm just giving that as an analogy. Does that help? Because the reason why
Yes,
it may not necessarily help immediately is because our mind again is so focused on only names and forms and things. We are unable to give that up. You know, it's like us holding on to something. If we feel that if I don't hold on to this, I will not be able to understand something.
yes, yes. So again, another thought is as a first step, we learn that any great thing is God. So that makes for us to practice, make us practice easier.
But that
Like for
was your
example, I
second
see.
thing, right? Your first statement actually was
Right, right. How do I combine these two? Like,
correct.
so, so one thing,
Mhm.
one thought is, I see first God, in all great things, and
Yes,
then as with the practice, then the the other next step is to see God in everything.
correct. But there
That's with the
is,
sadhana. Yeah.
yes. So I've always thought about this point, which is in our Hindu texts, it is actually meant for a very, very advanced sadhaka. What do I mean by that is those days people could take this big leap of understanding from here to they would just take one leap and okay, like you Anand, this is actually really a great question, and I'm sorry I'm going on and on about this. We will go to shlokas, of course, 11 and 12. Point I'm coming to is we are so used to in our Western way of education, which all of us have been used to, right? We are used to taking small step, one step to another step to another step. I'm able to understand this. But what you have presented today is a big leap. On one hand, we are asked to say that all things great is God. And the second thing is God is in everything. So first, I have to start developing the notion in my head that everything great is God, including, And the problem for us, it comes is when something, quote unquote, from my perspective, something bad is happening. Now, I know you're going to say, but isn't bad really happening? How can you say that whatever bad thing is happening outside is only in my head? We may question that, right? But the point is, even in what is happening bad, if I think that that is also great, you know, which is very, very difficult to difficult to practice that. And that practice actually happens only through constant Shravanam, Mananam, and the practice, the sadhanas, the exercises, but with understanding, constantly with understanding. That's how we develop ourselves to become an advanced sadhaka, you know. So it is a huge leap. We need a lot of small steps in between the two statements that you said, you know. And that is why I brought that example of Balavihar, in where Hanuman, in the beginning, we actually are molding the child's mental frame to think about the environment in which the child is in, that environment is a great thing, is a good thing. Constantly you're giving them positive. The satsang, we are actually developing the satsang for the child. Question may arise, but are we trying to suppress the feelings in a child? What if this child doesn't really think everything is great? That question may arise, right? But that also happens only through constant practice and mananam. And there will be a lot of doubts in the mind, but that doubts can be taken out only by coming in contact first with satsang, with always being in the midst of good people, and then that will take us to a guru, a guru who my personality can vibe with, and such a guru can help me understand this. Okay.
Thanks. It helps. Yeah, like as you mentioned, we see God's creation everywhere in the world, and then we forget God.
Right.
So
Right.
thanks.
Meena, you wanted to say something, or yes, somebody? Yeah, please.
Hari Om.
Hari Om, Meena.
Yeah. So, I mean, from what you're saying, can we say like this? Like, if you think there's nothing other than God in everything and everywhere, whatever we do, everything, we can feel it sometimes. We can, from our experience, personal experience, we really, really can feel that everywhere He's there. With even I know we have not come to that stage of doing a meditation or yoga, or we are not still there, but with the subtle level of what we are now, sometimes maybe we can say 25-30% we can, everybody, all of us would have experienced something, and we feel that there is a supreme power, and that is God.
Correct. Whenever you said it very well, Meena, which is whenever whenever something really great happens, if I can recognize the power, I mean, simple thing I can think is the days of tsunami. The first time when tsunami hit us, it was like, oh my God. I mean, until then, we never even knew there was something called the tsunami. It just hits you like anything. But of course, at that point in time, the destruction caused us to think about God in a different way. We basically were probably blaming God for why did He do this to us in the southern part of the universe, Earth, or whatever. But when that kind of a great power happens, or maybe something else. You see a beautiful sunrise, you get stunned. At that point, also, you think, you see the greatness of God. And actually, the presence of God is always there in anything and everything, but our mind immediately, unfortunately, doesn't stay in that realm of greatness that we experienced. It just brings you back into the mundane world and we forget about it. So
Exactly.
that's actually the biggest difference between jnanis, So jnanis, they are constantly in that realm,
Yeah, that's why I said we have not come to that level of doing too much meditation and everything. But with the little subtle our life experiences,
Right.
we ourselves can feel.
Correct. Correct. It again, meditation is not the answer. When I say meditation is not the answer, I mean my answer itself is incomplete. What I mean is a meditation which is coupled with constant mananam, that is reflection, and
Yeah.
that reflection which is backed up with solid knowledge and understanding.
Yes.
Those are very, very critical. If we don't have this, whatever we are meditating on becomes really fruitless, Meditation
Yeah.
is actually the final step. But
Yeah.
this constant reading, constant understanding, and then constant reflection, and actually focus and developing focus and concentration is very
Can we
important.
say concentration also, right? We can say
Yes.
concentration.
Yes, the exercises of focus and concentration is very important. And to develop the exercise and the kind of exercises we need, and one of them which I really wanted to also touch upon as part of the reflection is a question that Ishwari Yogi Amma, she brought it up just 2 days ago, and I'll explain that. All kinds of sattvic activities, and for all of us who are getting into that stage of our life where our responsibilities are getting over, before we get into something else, we should spend more and more and more time on really sattvic activities, develop a sattvic environment, have sattvic food, have enough sattvic sleep, and surround ourselves with sattvic thoughts. Only then will our mind be conducive to studying something and understanding that subject properly. So that physical part of it is very essential. And this is where Yogi Amma brought up this question about how do we explain the role of a puja, to a 10 to 12-year-old. Right, Amma? That was a question, correct? Was the answer I gave you, was that okay?
Okay, but
Amma, you're muted again.
I would have explained it in a different way.
Please.
I would have said that originally humans realized that there was a force which was beyond us, and they were frightened of it first, but realized that those forces were very helpful to them, like rain and sun and etc. And then they started to worship those and to appreciate it. And they used to do pujas and yagnas so that they continue to give good, give the good aspects for the world to continue. I would have explained that way.
Okay.
First, yeah.
Okay. Good. Very good. Yeah. It all depends upon where the child is also in his or her journey, where the child first has to recognize the power. Like you said, the power is first recognize there is a power because of which there is things are happening, and we need to celebrate that power.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Correct. But for the sake of today's discussion, what I wanted to just bring, Geeta, please say. Yeah.
No, I am just going to add one more sentence to what Anant was saying. God is great. God is in everywhere. God is everywhere. Now I will add one more sentence to that. Everything is great. Will that satisfy the question?
Everything is great. Yes, that is where it is leading to, because it's you're right. I mean, so you're connecting the two questions, two things by saying that everything is great. Yeah, ultimately that is where we are asked to accept and surrender to that. Ultimately, everything is great. Yes. Coming back to Amar's question on this puja part of it. So puja is at the level, so her question is of course directed towards what the child needed to be answered. But for us, the puja actually offers 16 steps, the whole puja ritual, in which we are invoking that power or that the greatness of God to come and reside in a murti, and then to that murti we actually do the same steps as what we would to do ourselves, like for example, taking a bath, offering clothes, offering food, and then finally, putting going through all those steps. So in puja we do that. We are actually um, invoking the presence of God in the murti, because, and the reason for doing that is, we are unable to fathom even that God is everywhere. To get to Anand's question here and to tie all the things that we're talking about. So puja is very, very essential for recognizing that the power is residing in the murti, because our mind is so accustomed only to see names and forms everywhere. So because of that, this puja is a very essential step, and it is a connection to the two questions like what Anant has put. It is a connection which will connect me to the power. To connect me to the power, first my mind has to quieten down. How can I quieten down my mind? Is give the mind what it is used to. Like, for example, in Bhajagovindam also, we have this thing, when you're young, you're given a toy. As when you grow older, you have something else. So our mind is always habituated to a name and form. So puja gives you that ritual. Or puja is a ritual for that. Yeah.
Yeah, just on the same question as the puja, as kids, we were told to on the Vinayak Chavati, like we were told to worship Ganesha, and what we're told is, then we'll get good studies and we'll do well in the exams.
Correct.
So I mean, we still have to study. That's what the elders told. So as a starting step for puja, that might help.
Correct. So again, your question is so loaded. I mean, because I have to study well, I have to do the puja, and especially in Ganesh Chaturthi, it's even more significant because we make that manjapudi player, I mean the turmeric player, which is so significant actually, because you're making this turmeric player, or actually also the other forms, and then you actually take it and put it into an ocean where it disintegrates. So the significance of that also is, you're putting that power, bringing the power into this. I think, Suvarna, your video is affected. Yeah. And then finally we're saying, okay, I'm immersing this idol into this, because the puja has satisfied its need for what I wanted to do, which is to bring about the focus and concentration. The job is over. I'm taking that mud back to where it belongs, Wonderful. Great discussion. Any other final thoughts before we move into just a kind of a review, and then we go to the last few shlokas. I think, Geeta, you're back, so you understood what you missed here. So in the first three shlokas, we saw how Krishna is actually delighted with Arjuna. It's so amazing. I mean, now when I'm reading this in the context of what we discussed, the questions that Anant raised, gave us a little bit of thing to think about. So Krishna is very delighted with Arjuna. In the second verse, he says, this knowledge of who he is beyond even the names and forms, like we said. So, which is why even the greatest of rishis and devas, nothing wrong against them, that they should be penalized for not knowing. It's not that. But even the bestest of people will not be able to really understand him in his essence. That is what he's trying to say. And then in the third shloka, he actually tells us why we need to know him in his essence. That example that I gave of the mud and the pots, or because even in and through all the pots, if I can recognize that what I'm seeing is only mud, not the forms, correct? So that is the objective he's coming to. So Krishna is in and through again and again trying to tell Arjuna about why he needs to know, because there's a deep component of mental health also here in this shloka here, but we won't go into it. But that's the objective ultimately, is to transport himself away from this world of Maya, which later in one of the shlokas, he talks about the vibhuti and yoga part of it. So that's and then 4, 5, and 6 is he discusses these subtle manifestations before he goes into the more gross manifestations, which is the Adidevik. And the gross manifestations is what Krishna is going to really expound about in this chapter. And the Adhyatmic qualities, we talked about Buddhi, Jnanam, Shama, Dama, and all those qualities, and Satyam, Kshama, then existence, all that was discussed. And then in shlokas 7 to 11, which is where we'll focus in today, is that he really goes into the Vibhuti, And what is Vibhuti? Vibhuti is that extraordinary manifestation of Lord's creation, and which really reflects his greatness, his majesty, his awe-inspiring quality, etc. All these. And here, the way, and Anant already explained a couple of things, the Meru Mountains, all this is nothing but he explains as the beauty of it. And yeah, and just to give you a breakup of those shlokas, again, I'm moving a little quickly here because of the review of these shlokas. So in shloka number 7, he starts to explain what are those divine glories. And then he explains why this is important, because it starts to develop the attitude in my mind, which is that second question that Anant was saying, which is to say that I am in everything. Everything is God. How do I come to that level? Is only by developing that devotion. That part of it one cannot get by intellectual thinking or whatever. The intellectual thinking at some point stops, and then my mind develops that devotion, to do that. So bhava samanvitaha, he explains in the shloka number 8. And ultimately, machchitta madgata pranaha, when that happens, there are two words actually. At that point, he explains the vibhuti and yoga. I think, I'm not sure whether it's 8 or 9 shloka. He talks about where your mind gets plunged into meditation and completely, as you in and through everything, you actually see none other than that God everywhere. And one becomes satata yuktanam. You are in that knowledge all the time. And he brings in two words, avikampena, that word one, which is the avikampena. The other, there's one more word. He gives the buddhi yoga. And that's the, in shloka number 11, he talks that, when that happens, one is endowed with that the finest of yogas, which is Buddhi Yoga, the lamp of knowledge. So this is how the breakup is for all the shlokas 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, just to give you a gist of it. And just to go a little more detail into the shloka then, so he says, Etam Vibhutim. Again, I just want you to tie these shlokas here, what each one is saying, to now when we come to the shloka itself. So for example, here in shloka 7, he talks about, Etam Vibhutim Yogam Cha Mamayo Veti Tatvataha Saha Avikampena Yogena Yujyate na atra samshaya. Absolutely no doubt at all. In our minds, for example, we are so full of doubts, and which is why all the things that we experience is mainly because in and through each and every experience, we are actually we are supposed to dissolve our doubts. But we get so caught up in the world that there's more and more and more doubts in our mind, and we are unable to get out of it. So there is that the knowledge is necessary for us, and that is why here he's saying that somebody who sees these manifestations nothing but me alone in all of them, such a person is completely becomes devoted. And that is where these two words, as I said, vibhuti and yoga and avikampena, were beautiful words which we analyze quite deeply. And then in shloka number 8, which is, again, I want to just go back and show you that thing. He talks about how you develop the devotion. And that is where in 7, 8, he says, Aham sarvasya prabhavaha. Okay, so bhava samanvitaha. So when I recognize that I am the source of all, again, going back to Anand's question, Anand's statement, where everything is nothing but God. Aham sarvasya prabhavaha. I am the source of all. From me, everything is evolved. When I understand this, such people develop that devotion. They get endowed with that devotion. And that devotion is, of course, the highest form of the yoga itself. Then in Shloka 9, which is there, where he says, this Madchitta Madgataf Pranaha Bodhayanta Parasparam Katayantascha Mam Nityam Tushyanti Cha Ramanti Cha. Again, beautiful comparison to Bhajagovindam, where there are 2 shlokas about, there's a description of the person who revels, who's constantly, it's like a madman going around just totally in devotion, so much chitta. So with that, such a person, the mind is completely engrossed in that Lord, in that essence. The life, everything that he does is ultimately only for that Lord, Tushyanti cha ramanti cha. That person is completely contented, completely delighted. And then in shloka number 10, where he says, again, I'll just go back quickly to refresh your mind and the connection. I want to make sure. So such a person where madchitta madgataf pranaha, such person is completely devoted. What is his state? He's ever steadfast, so this is the one which is, he's saying in shloka number 10, such a person is completely, because of his conviction, he is steadfast in his devotion, and he worships bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. So he says, a person who is recognized it, now you may say it's kind of a catch-22 situation, right? First, you're supposed to accept that everything is nothing but that Lord. What you're seeing is that Lord. You're going beyond names and forms. But we're also saying that that knowledge can come only through Shravana Mananam Nididhyasanam, right? So in some sense, it goes hand in hand. First, I have to accept that there is God in and through even the worst of criminals, the the worst of people who have done bad for me, for example, in and through, when I start developing, then Krishna is saying, I give them the highest knowledge. Dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayanti te. So I give that person the highest knowledge. So he says, I give them buddhi yoga, which again, we talked a lot about it before. And again, when we go to a temple and pray, we ask for a lot of material things. But what we should be asking more is this buddhi yoga, So, and then in shloka number 11 and 12, which we will do today, is that, Krishna says, even if you want a guru, I will provide you. I'll provide you shastram. I'll provide you anything and everything you need. But all I want you to do is come to that point when you recognize that it is me and me alone everywhere. And that is where he says, Tesham eva anukampartam aham ajnanam tamaha nashayami atma bhavastaha jnana deepena bhasvata. There is a mistake in the English version here. It should be bhasvata. That's why I was reading and I got stuck here. But so here he says, so this is like the final task, which the Lord is saying, that ultimately, see, we are actually, because of our interaction in this world of names and forms, where I'm so attracted to names and forms, and all my transactions are only keeping in mind that it is, this world is full of individuals, this world is full of opportunities. This is how, we also train our kids. This world is full of opportunities. You do your best, make lots of money, may do this, do that. That's constantly how our education trains us that way. So much so that it becomes a habit. And that habit, that is what here he's trying to say is the tamaha, or darkness. Darkness in the sense of ignorance. So ignorance is the one which is classified by this word, tamaha. And that ignorance is, we are ignoring the fact that it is nothing but the Lord everywhere. Instead, we think it's all individuals, opportunities, making money. That is the ignorance that he's talking about. So for those people who he says, out of mere compassion, for them, their darkness born of ignorance, I destroy that, dwelling in the heart by the luminous lamp of knowledge. So he says, I'm trying to give them this lamp of knowledge by which they can actually get rid of this samsara. Again, getting rid of samsara doesn't mean that I commit suicide or something like that and then I get this one. That is not. But I'm giving them, even for them, which is this lamp of knowledge. And what do we mean by Jnana Deepa? Just like how, again, going back to the puja ritual that Amma had brought out. So just as, in a temple, a pujari offers worship to all the deities in a temple, here we are asked to think in our own mind that, the picture of Krishna himself, who is doing such a worship while we are seated in our heart. So there, he's sitting in a heart, he's very quiet, he's waiting for the whole temple to be still and quiet before he picks up the matchstick and we're lighting. That's what the pujari does. So once the lamp is lit, it is actually destined to permanently end this endless interaction we have with the world. Okay? One strike with the match, is enough to bring that light within me. And in that light, I should understand my own role in this whole world. That is what that lighting of the lamp, lighting that one matchstick is supposed to do, is to remove all the darkness. I mean, that analogy is beautiful. And that is why all our garbhagrahas, is so dark. It's because just to give that idea of when I light the lamp, it is supposed to remove the darkness, not just outside, but within my own mind. And that is the Jnana Deepa, So that is the ultimate thing. And so Krishna, out of his own compassion, has given that light of knowledge within ourselves, but we are not able to see it mainly because of our own, involvement in the outside. So just by light of that one lamp with that stick of matchstick can give us. So how is that, just how is this metaphor which is used here? So here we see that we're going to a place like the temple, which is completely has been purified for such a long time with all the great things that we do to sanctify a temple. So that is a protected place, and that lamp is a representation of our own antakarana, our own mind, and that wick, the lamp wick is representative of our own intellect, which has gone through so many sadhana. And here brahmacharya basically indicates the control of the mind. And the oil is the representation of the bhakti or the love. And oxygen is the intensity of meditation within me. And ultimately, the light or the lamp is that knowledge, the jnana deepa, which is in a form of analogy, just represents that state of realization that I'm Brahman. So this is just a kind of an analogy of the whole thing. So the Lord is actually there in our own heart, but we are unable to visualize it. But just by this act of going to the temple, lighting the lamp, etc., Krishna is saying, I will light the lamp of wisdom in the minds of even the Virat Bhakta, in the mind of that Bhakta also, I will light the lamp of wisdom. And here wisdom essentially means the jnanam. And what is jnanam? The jnanam is that everything is God. I'm again going back to the statement. I'm so glad in our reflection time he brought it. So that knowledge part of it is what we are asked to access, So any thoughts or questions on this use of this analogy of light, of lamp? So again, somehow this connects to the puja which Amma had brought that question. But again, this is a lot deeper. We cannot explain this to a 10 to 12-year-old child, So then so this sort of completes another section in the 10th chapter where Krishna is telling Arjuna about, give some deep concepts here. So now Arjuna is, there's a chance for Arjuna to ask the question in question 12 here. So Arjuna actually is asking the question about us. We'll see the question itself. So he says, Arjuna uvacha param brahma param dhama param brahma param dhama pavitram paramam bhavan pavitram paramam bhavan purusham shashvatam divyam purusham shashvatam divyam adidevamajam vibhum adidevamajam vibhum. So Krishna so far, has talked about his manifestations, right? And he's talked about actually the manifestations in this entire Jagat, the Vishwarupa. And he's also talked about the benefits of what happens if you access that Jnana Deepa, that knowledge. So with this, one would think that Krishna's teaching is over, and he's done it. So why even bother to go through the rest of shlokas? But then this is where Arjuna is asking this question. He is still not done yet, So he's asking all these questions. Hey, Krishna, you've told me that you are the supreme Brahman. You've told me that you are the final abode. You have told me that, you are the final purifier for the knowledge. You've said all this. And you also said you are the Deva, Adi Devam. And Ajam, you are unborn and you're omnipresent. So what else is there to know? So that is where, again, in the shloka number 13, he says about how do I understand all the shlokas? And he actually brings the various gods and everything, like even sage Narada, and how they have interpreted this. So Arjuna just wants a little more clarification, because he has heard how these rishis and Narada have asked a question, and there's actually a lot more that we need to do. So we will do that next week. Okay. Oh, sorry, I forgot to change the date. Next week is 16th. We'll meet. 15th, August 15th, our Independence Day. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shanti. Om purnamadav purnamidam purnat purnamudachyate. Purnasya purnamadaya purnameva vashishyate. Om shanti shanti shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om. Hari
Thank you, Sunitha ji. Hari Om, everyone.
Thank
Hari
you.
Om.
Hari Om.
Welcome. Hari Om.
Hari Om. Thank you, Sunitha ji.
You're welcome. I'm not sure why.
Thank you,
Thank
Sunitha
you
ji.
so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You,
Let me stop sharing. Yeah.
you haven't stopped recording.
Oh, yes, I have to stop recording. Thank you.